All right, today we're going to do a deep dive into a really fascinating political document. We're looking at the official 2014 platform of the Green Party of the United States. And look, this isn't just some list of policies, right? It's really their blueprint for a fundamentally different America as they saw it a decade ago. So let's get into it and see what that vision really looked like. So the platform kicks off with this really powerful call to action. This one sentence, it just perfectly captures the aspirational and, yeah, you could even say radical vision that's really behind their entire political project. It totally sets the stage for a document that's not about small tweaks here and there. Nope, this is about big systemic change. Okay, so to really get a handle on this blueprint, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at who the Greens actually say they are. Then, we'll dig into their 10 key values. These are super important because they drive everything else. After that, we'll check out their big policy ideas for society and the environment, and we'll finish up with their final call to action.
All right, first up, who exactly are the Greens, according to their own platform? Well, they position themselves as something more than just a party. They see themselves as a movement.
The platform puts a huge emphasis on structure and funding. They define themselves as a federation of state parties, which is basically a bottom-up kind of organization. And this next part is absolutely crucial. They operate without corporate donors. This is so central to their identity, to their whole argument that they're a real alternative to what they call the bipartisan political duopoly.
So an identity like that has to be built on a pretty specific foundation, right? Before we can even start talking about policies on, say, healthcare or the economy, we have to understand the party's core principles. And for them, that's the 10 key values. And the platform is super explicit about this. It calls it a values-based politics. This is their direct answer to a political system that, in their view, is just driven by profit and exploitation. Every single policy proposal we're about to look at is designed to flow directly from these core principles.
And here they are. Now, this covers a huge range of ideas, but you can kind of group them into three main themes: how we govern ourselves, how we treat each other, and how we relate to the planet. But four of these in particular really stand out as the absolute pillars of their entire worldview: grassroots democracy, social justice, ecological wisdom, and nonviolence. These really form the bedrock of the whole green political philosophy. Okay, so keeping those values in mind, let's dive into the first major pillar of their platform. This is all about how they propose to restructure our government and our society. For the Greens, the biggest problem with American democracy boils down to one thing: money. They argue that what we have is a corrupt campaign finance system that basically lets corporate and wealthy elites purchase the political outcomes they want. And in the process, it completely silences the voices of ordinary citizens. So their proposed solution isn't just about, tweaking donation limits, it's a total overhaul. They call for something called proportional representation. Basically, if a party gets 15% of the vote, they'd get roughly 15% of the seats in government. It would give smaller parties a real voice. They also want full public financing for all elections, to get rid of the Electoral College, and a constitutional amendment to end corporate personhood. That's the whole legal idea that gives corporations many of the same rights as people. Now, when it comes to social justice, the platform really zeroes in on inequality. It paints a picture of a nation with this massive, ever-widening gap between the wealthy and, well, everyone else. And they point to a key statistic from back then to make their case: over 50 million Americans didn't have medical insurance. And again, their proposed solutions are pretty sweeping. They call for finally passing the Equal Rights Amendment, for guaranteeing women's reproductive rights, and for creating a federally funded entitlement program to end poverty. Oh, and they also advocate for restoring full citizenship rights, including the right to vote, to felons as soon as they've completed their sentences. So this number, $700 billion plus, this really gets to the heart of the party's view on national priorities. This was the defense budget back in 2012, and the platform argues that this figure is just completely out of whack with the country's actual needs.
And that thinking leads directly to this, a really stark contrast in foreign policy. The platform points out that, under the status quo, the U.S. is the largest arms seller in the world. The Green Party's goal? Simple: prohibit all arms sales to foreign nations. It's a vision for a completely different role for America in the world.
Okay, that brings us to their second major pillar. And this one is all about planet and prosperity. This is where they directly link the health of our planet with the fairness of our economy. For the Greens, these two things are totally intertwined. You can't solve one without solving the other.
At the heart of their environmental policy is this really important concept called the precautionary principle. It sounds complicated, but it's actually a simple but profound shift. Think about it. Instead of forcing communities to prove that a chemical or factory is dangerous, this principle flips the script. It would require the polluters to prove their actions are safe before they're even allowed to start. The platform basically argues that our ecological crises are a direct result of our economic system. They define the problem as an economy that's built on unsustainable consumption and is controlled by these vast, undemocratic concentrations of corporate power. So it makes sense then that their economic solutions are also designed to be ecological solutions. They call for curbing corporate power, establishing a livable income for everybody, enacting fair, progressive taxation, and, this is a big one, promoting local, community-based economies. Okay, so finally, the platform doesn't just end with a big list of policies. It wraps everything up with an invitation. This is their final rallying cry. It's a really direct appeal for grassroots involvement, right? It's framing political change not as something that's delivered by leaders from the top down, but as something that has to be built by citizens from the ground up. And they make a point to emphasize that this whole document isn't just set in stone. It's presented as a living document, something that's meant to evolve through a continuous grassroots process. In a way, the platform itself is supposed to be an example of the kind of politics they want to practice. So, I want to leave you with a final thought here. Remember, this platform was written a decade ago. When you look at these ideas today, things like the public financing of elections or a livable income, the real question is, which of these proposals, that were maybe seen as fringe back then, have now entered the mainstream political debate? It's definitely something to think about.